elected official in the land. Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, Twitter's Jack Dorsey, Apple's Tim Cook, Alphabet's Sundar Pichai, and Amazon's Jeff Bezos have more power today than Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, and Henry Ford ever did in the earliest days of the 20th century. These modern-day tech monopolists can pick presidential election winners, control our national debates, decide whose voice is heard, whose voice is not heard. The Supreme Court no longer decides what the law of the First Amendment is in this great country. These tech executives do. In practice, big tech controls the country, and they control the country by deciding what we see. Well said, Mr. Travis. I mean, if this doesn't underscore why we need to remove the liability protection in Section 230, I don't know what does. Mr. Greenwald makes many of the same points in his written testimony, and then he says this about the specific question at hand at this committee hearing today. He says, how Congress sets out to address Silicon Valley's immense and undemocratic power is a complicated question. Well, it is, posing complex challenges. The proposal to vest media companies with an antitrust exemption in order to allow them to negotiate as a consortium or cartel seeks to rectify a real and serious problem. Very true. But, and this is important, but empowering large media companies could easily end up creating more problems than it solves. He goes on to say this, further empowering this already powerful media industry, which has demonstrated it will use its force to silence competitors under the guise of, quote, quality control, runs the real risk of transferring the abusive monopoly power from Silicon Valley to corporate media companies. And this last clause is important. Or even worse, encouraging some sort of de facto merger in which these two industries pool their power to the mutual benefit of each. We already saw that happen. We saw it in last fall's election. Both Mr. Travis and Mr. Greenwald cite this in their written testimony. Last fall, when big media teamed up with big tech to make sure the American people didn't hear about the Hunter Biden story in the weeks leading up to a presidential election. So we've already seen them team up against we the people. And now we have legislation that's going to give big media this consortium and cartel power. At the same time, we're looking to use antitrust law to deal with big tech. We're going to give an the shelf. We're not going to look at it. But if anyone knew it was real, it's them. That's why I asked the question. Again, back to my colleague from New York, what he was talking about. That's why I asked the question earlier. I said, did anyone at the FBI or Mr. Baker know, did Mr. Baker talk to any of those 51 former intel officials who sent the letters saying this has all the classic earmarks of a Russian misinformation operation? Maybe they could have checked with the FBI because the FBI had the actual laptop in their possession. So I appreciate the gentleman from Louisiana. I think it's a great point that he made. Mr. Roth, I'm going to come back to you in something we were at a few hours ago. And we're talking about this visibility filtering, which in my mind I understand to be something short of suspending and blocking the account, which the user then knows has happened because there's a notification in a public way, like you did to Ms. Green when you suspended her account. But there's other things, this search blacklist, this do not amplify, that are some kind of filtering that account that the user doesn't know about. And I asked the question earlier, was there any bit of this visibility filtering that was hard-coded by Twitter employees into the account of specific users? And you said, you hesitated for a while, and you said, well, you wouldn't use the term hard-coded, but it seemed to me like something like that went on. Can you elaborate?
Thank you for the question. Twitter's visibility filtering system, as has been reported in the Twitter files, is based on applying labels to user accounts. And so in that sense, if the application of a label is what you meant by hard-coded, yes, Twitter systems did apply those designations to those accounts. But it was seldom the case that Twitter staff would manually, individually go in and apply those labels directly.
Were any government officials, were those labels and therefore that filtering done to any government officials, any elected officials, where the user wouldn't know about?
I don't know, sir. I didn't have access to my Twitter computer, to any Twitter systems to prepare me to answer that question. So
I'm just talking your time there and your experience there. Do you know if that happened?
It would not surprise.
We have $6 gas in California, $4 gas everywhere else in the country. We have crime at record levels in every major urban area in this nation, and we have an inflation problem that's at a 40-year high. And this committee has more contempt resolutions for a purely political reason I think the whole committee is purely political, designed to do one thing: keep President Trump off the ballot in 2024. The gentlelady from Wyoming, in her opening comments, used the term false message. False, she used to say big lie, now I guess it's false message. And I just jotted down, I thought when she said, I started jotting things down. False, think about all the false messages we've got from them in the last few years. They told us the protests in the summer of 2020 were peaceful. Got $1 billion worth of damage around our cities that says it wasn't. They told us the dossier was real. They told us it was Republicans who wanted to defund the police. That's almost laughable if it wasn't so serious for our law enforcement and for the families who live in those areas where mayors and city councils did defund the police. They told us the FBI didn't spy on the Trump campaign. We know that wasn't true. We got Inspector General reports that tell us all kinds of things about what they did in front of the FISA court. They said Trump colluded with Russia. We got a Mueller report, 19 lawyers, 40 FBI agents, 30 million hard-earned American tax dollars in that report that said that false message was just that, false. They told us COVID didn't start in the lab. Sure looks like it did. They told us the lab wasn't doing gain-of-function research. Sure looks like it was. They told us the vaccinated can't get it. We know that's wrong. Every day there's a new announcement. A member of Congress is getting it. Fully vaccinated, boosted, everything else. They told us the vaccinated can't transmit it. They told us that was wrong. And you talk about the biggest false message that's just been confirmed in the last week, how false it was. The Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. The Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. October 22nd, 2020, 2 weeks before the election, candidate Biden, in a debate, is asked about his son's business dealings with foreign companies. He says, quote, nothing was unethical. He said, my son has not made money with business interests with companies with an interest in China. And we all know there are 4.8 million reasons why that statement was not accurate. And how do we know? Washington Post told us. Not me, not President Trump, not Republicans. The Washington Post told us last week, 2 stories last week, a week ago today, one at 11 a.m., one at 11:04 a.m., 2 8-page articles 4 minutes apart confirming what we knew, but what big media, big tech, Democrats colluded to keep from the American people just days before the most important election we have, the presidential election. Who's going to be our next commander-in-chief? The laptop was real, the eyewitness was real, the emails were real. The only thing fake was that collusion from those individuals, those entities, to keep important information from we the people in the run-up to the most important election we have. And oh, by the way, they were joined by 51 former intel officials, joined in the collusion. You know, it's also interesting, it's funny how that story has changed. 18 months ago, started off, wasn't his laptop, quickly switched to, well, it was his laptop, but it was Russian disinformation. And now it is, well, it wasn't Russian disinformation, but Joe Biden had nothing to do with it. Now it was, well, Joe knew what was going on, but he wasn't really involved in anything wrong. Ron Klain told us that. Chief of Staff told us that Sunday. We need to be focused on the issues that the American people want us to focus on. If you want to talk about danger to our democracy and the biggest false message, I would say what happened, one of the biggest dangers to our democracy and one of the biggest false messages is what happened 18 months ago, where that story was kept from the
media, big tech, social media giants, global institutions and foundations, Democrat Party operatives, and elected officials. As the Twitter files reveal, these actors work in concert to defeat their political opponents and promote left-wing ideology and government control over our lives. My eyes began opening to this reality with the disclosure of how the Obama administration weaponized the IRS to harass Tea Party groups by denying them tax-exempt status. My personal knowledge and experience with agency corruption began in 2015 when I became chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. My first investigation ultimately revealed the extensive editing of then FBI Director James Comey of his July 5, 2016 statement that exonerated Secretary Clinton regarding her use of a private email server for official business. The edits were clearly made to downplay the seriousness of her actions. It is important to note those partisan edits were made by the same cast of characters in the FBI that would initiate and drive the corrupt Russian-Trump collusion investigation. During our investigation of the FBI's involvement in the Russian collusion hoax, Senator Grassley and I uncovered and made public highly partisan text messages between FBI employees Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Strzok's December 15, 2016 test, quote, "Think our sisters have begun leaking like mad. Scorned, worried, and political, they're kicking into overdrive, has never been given the attention it deserves." In 2022 interview with Jeff Girth, Strzok said he now believes, quote, that it is more likely the text came not from the CIA, but from senior levels of the U.S. government or Congress. Who might those leakers be? Why aren't reporters who receive the leaks outraged at being fed false information? And why haven't they blown the whistle on the leakers? Why didn't the mainstream media robustly investigate how they were all duped? The answer is they weren't duped. They were complicit in creating and fostering the political turmoil our country has been experiencing over the last 6 years. Those leaks were a key ingredient in the most destructive, political, dirty trick in U.S. history: the creation and promotion of the false Russia-Trump collusion narrative. To be most effective, however, that narrative relied on coordination between government actors and the media. And the left had allies in the FBI. Unable to verify the Steele dossier, the FBI offered Christopher Steele $1 million to provide verification. By December 2016, the FBI knew they had investigated Steele's primary subsource as a Russian spy. In the main body of the Department of Justice Inspector General's report on FISA abuse, FBI official Bill Priestap is quoted saying the FBI, quote, didn't have any indication whatsoever, unquote, of Russian influence on the Steele dossier. Our investigation uncovered redacted footnotes to that same document that completely contradicted that statement. Why would Priestap's false statement appear in the report, but the truth be hidden in classified footnotes? 14 months later, in February 2018, the FBI still briefed the Senate Intelligence Committee that the dossier had validity. When the Mueller report found no evidence of collusion, the left engineered an impeachment of President Trump. The cooperation between the House Intelligence Committee and the impeachment whistleblower remains murky. Then Chairman Adam Schiff originally denied his committee had contact with the whistleblower prior to the filing of the complaint, a claim Schiff later attempted to walk back. The genesis of the impeachment saga has yet to be fully investigated. It needs to be. Prior to the impeachment proceedings, Hunter Biden's obvious conflicts of interest in Ukraine became public, and Senator Grassley and I began investigating. We didn't target Joe and Hunter Biden. Their actions demanded it. On December 9, 2019, the FBI issued a grand jury subpoena and took possession of Hunter Biden's laptop from John Paul McIsaac, a computer shop owner in Wilmington, Delaware. As the FBI left his shop with the laptop, Mr. McIsaac recalled one agent saying, quote, "It is our experience that nothing ever happens to people that don't talk about these things," unquote. That statement was the opening salvo in a coordinated effort over the next 10 months to sabotage any public revelation of Hunter Biden's laptop or any wrongdoing connected to the Bidens. Senator Grassley has provided a number of examples of that sabotage, and we will release a report that goes into far greater detail than we have time for today. When available, I hope everyone will read it. Perhaps the most egregious and effective act of sabotage against the truth was the public letter signed by 51 former intelligence officials that claimed the laptop had, quote, all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation, unquote. That letter itself was an information operation that interfered with and impacted the 2020 presidential election to a far greater extent than anything Russia ever could have hoped to achieve. Each of those intelligence officials needs to be interviewed to determine how that letter was masterminded. While we all condemned the violence on January 6th, we all condemned the violence on January 6th. The fervor in which the Biden Department of Justice has pursued those protesters and rioters